I'm going to look at something a bit different here. I'm going to look at some just some rigging exercises, just very quickly on a mechanical object. So this is a lot easier than working with something organic, such as a character. We don't have to worry as much about, particularly within the skinning element. Some of the elements within there. So I have this mechanical arm. I've actually flattened this all down to one mesh, but all of these parts are still individual. So individual elements. I've not welded any of these points together. And what I'm going to do is put a bone structure inside this to allow this to work. This is really with the intention of taking this across to a game engine as well. So we'll also look at how we can bake the animation and export this out, maybe in a second part of this. So what I've done in terms of the modeling, say I'm not worrying about the modeling in this one. What I have done though is I've considered where each of the joints is going to go. So I'm going to have one joint which is going to rotate this base around. So just to be able to essentially move this part here. I'm going to have a joint which is going to be for this, which I'm going to pivot around this point, which is going to kind of rotate that. I'm going to go back to this point here. With this point, I'm going to have a section that rotates around this point here. And again, that will rotate. And then this point is just going to click on this. It's going to rotate around itself there. Okay. So I've got specific points where I'm going to put these joints to help me align them and snap them to this object. But as I say, the only one I haven't got is really down here. So I want the joint to be roughly in the center of this, and I want this to be pretty accurate, because otherwise, if this rotates wrong, it starts looking a bit odd. So I'm just going to put some extra cuts in this. I'm going to use my multi-cut tool, Control-Shift-X. I'm going to just create an edge loop through this. So I'm going to create it right in the middle, so middle mouse click rather than left click. And then in this section here, just middle mouse click. I'm not worried about this over here, I just need 1 point. So this is going to be my 1 point of reference here to actually snap my joints to. So what I'm going to do is going to go into the side view. And when you're creating joints, it is best to do them in an orthographic view, not in the perspective view. Much easier to actually place them. So I'm going to have a joint down here. I'm going to have one here, one here, and one here. And bring this round. Okay. Just make sure that I have wireframe unshaded selected, which I do, so that I can actually see the mesh when I'm putting these joints in the right place. And another thing that I'm going to have on is this X-ray joint. So if I just click this off, we can find joints under, if I make sure I'm on the rigging toolset, so the rigging module. Otherwise you won't get these tools up here, which we need. Under skeleton, we have create joints. So just to demonstrate, if I click these in here, you see I can't actually see this unless I was to go into something like a wireframe. So on that, carry on. So let me just grab this and delete this. So in fact, let me just kind of show you. Let's put this back into place. If I click shading and X-ray joints, you see we can now actually see those joints in amongst that. Let's grab that, delete it. So let's go ahead and create the joints. So I'm going to put them pretty much near where they need to be, but then I'm actually going to snap them in. So skeleton, create joints. Start down here. Click our first point, and then I'm just going to go through. I'm pressing shift down, and that will create a straight area here. And similarly, if I click shift down here, it will create a straight point. So, but I don't have to worry too much about that in this initial placement. So I'm going to create a point around here. And then I'm actually going to create a point outside of this mesh around here. Okay, so something like that. If you find that your joints are too small to see, you can actually, I'm just going to click on. So this one here is known as the root. The root joint is the joint that all other joints are connected to. If this was an actual character, then this would be the center of mass around the pelvis, in the middle of the body. So if you want to, if you're having difficulty seeing these, what we can do is just go to display. I'm going to go to animation, and under joint size, I can actually size these up. And that's more as a viewing thing rather than anything else. It doesn't affect It can affect the envelope actually around it. But so I'll just bring those up a little bit. Okay. Close this. So I'm going to go in now and start snapping these in. I'm going to go up here and just use my, if this isn't here by the way, you can click on this, bring this out. This is our selection filter, essentially. So if I just click off this in the middle, this is poly objects. If I unselect that, it means that I can't actually select my poly object anymore, which is easier, so I'm not accidentally clicking on it, I'm just selecting the joints. So I'm now going to go through on this. Just a note about this, by the way. Just because I've done this on a side view, what this has done, and the way I've modelled this along the 0 line, this has placed our joints perfectly down the centre as well, which is useful. Let's just go into this again, press space. And now I'm going to start actually just snapping these in. So with my move tool, if we were just to reposition these, so you see when I drag this, it drags all the chain up. If I click on this and move this about, again what it does is move the rest of the chain up. And sometimes we don't want to do that, we just want to affect the joint itself, just affect this one without affecting all the others around it that are connected to it. So the way we do that is with the, I find the easiest way to do this is actually just by pressing and holding D down. By doing that, we're just affecting the initial joint itself. So now with D pressed down, you'll see that actually this just affects this one joint. It doesn't affect the children of this, which can be really handy. So I'm just going to start from the beginning here. Press D, and I'm also going to press V down. Note, snap to verts. I'm going to snap this in. So I'm just going to snap this into this one here, and also on the y-axis, just on that point at the bottom. And I'm going to do this for all of my joints on this. So let's select the next one. D press down and V press down at the same time. Keep them held down. Snap this in horizontally. Snap this in vertically. So that's why I'm using this one in the middle here to snap to. Move on. And this is why I created this line here. So D and V. Oops. Rotation. D and V. Make sure I'm on the translate. Done that again. Make sure I'm on the translate again and snap that in. Moving to the next one. D and V. This one snapped. This one snapped. Moving to the next one. So you may find with this one, as I snap, it kind of snaps a bit back, and this is just because it's snapping to the line that is, this is inset into this a little bit. It's a separate mesh when I made it, and I just pushed it in a little bit. So, but that's fine because we're rotating this around a different point. I will snap this vertically as well. And then with this one, I'm not worried about the position out of here. I'll just get the vertical position and snap that in as well. These can be useful on the end. If we want to connect anything to this eventually, we can connect them to this nub, this end of the joint chain. It also can make skinning a little easier as well. You tend to have the end bones, so even on fingers or the top of the head or the end of toes, just sticking out a little bit from the mesh, and it just allows it to make sure that all the vertices are being skinned. Which isn't as much of a problem in this instance, but it can be with an organic mesh. So there I've got my joint chain, okay, all the way through. It is important to go in and name our joints. And if we were doing this on an organic structure, we'd name them according to the joints themselves. So knee, ankle, hips, spine, elbow, etc., etc. With this, I'm just going to give it names according to this. I find the easiest way to do this is with the outliner. So I'm just going to click into the outliner. Here we have our joint, and I can actually go down this and delve into the joints themselves. So I'm going to click on the first one, double click. I'm going to give this a prefix of JNT for joint underscore. I'm going to call this mech arm underscore. I'm going to call this 001. And what I'm actually going to do is just highlight this name and copy it, just to make this a bit quicker. So let's paste this one in. Let's change this to 02. Paste this. Let's set this to 03. 04. This is 05. And for the last one, I'm going to click on this and I'm going to call it going to give it a suffix on this, end. So this is just telling me that this is the end bone in the chain, or the end joint in the chain. I will give this a name, a number as well, 001, in case I do have other joint chains that have an end bone on them. So if I had another copy of this or multiple copies of this, I'll be able to differentiate between them all. Okay, so that's my naming. I'll bring the outliner back up in a second, but just to bring this on. So now we've got our joints in there, we have our mesh, we now need to skin these in. So to do this, I need to be able to click back on my mesh again. So the order of this is really important. What we've got to do, we're going to make sure that we click on the mesh first, and then we start clicking on the joint chain. If you had multiple parts of the mesh, so say, again, if I was working on an organic character, what I would do, for example, if you had a jacket or separate clothing on it, I would click on the mesh and then click on the other parts of the mesh, and then just by shift clicking, and then make sure that I shift click on the joint chain last, because the last thing I select will be is what Maya will look for to skin to. So in this case, I'm going to click on this to make it a bit easier for myself. Again, I'm going to go into my outliner. I'm going to shift click on just the root of this object. So just this, in my case, this joint mech arm 001. And then we can go up to skin. So skeleton, the create joint, this is a rigging side of it. This is where we're creating the bone structure. And we can also create control objects for these things, which I may do in a different tutorial. And the skin side is the skinning. So in here, I'm going to go into this bind skin. Okay, go into the options. Let's reset these. So there's a couple of things we can change in this. The joint hierarchy, I only need to select the root joint and it will use the entire joint chain. If there are joints in here that you don't need to skin to, you can just select the joints you want and use selected joints. In that case, I'll leave it a joint hierarchy for this. Bind method, we can use closest distance or closest in hierarchy. From what I understand still, things like geodesic voxel and heat map make a much better attempt at skinning, especially for more complex characters. I believe that both of these cannot be used for game engines. That's my understanding. Maybe that's changed now. I haven't looked into it for a little while, but I'm just going to be safe. What I'm going to use is the closest in hierarchy. So it's going to use the vertices are essentially being controlled by the closest bone to them, to those vertex positions. I'm going to leave everything else as it is. We could change this max influences. So this is basically for each individual vertices, this is the amount of joints that it can be controlled by. So I have a maximum of 5. And again, for games, I think this is the maximum you can use. 4 or 5 shouldn't be more than that. It can cause problems. In essence, with this, because actually, I'm just having, because this is a mechanical mesh, so this part here is all going to be controlled by this bone, this part here is all going to be controlled by this bone. I could actually set the max influences to 1 on this. What I may do to illustrate a point in a little bit is just set this to 2, just for illustration purposes. And then when I'm happy with everything, I'm just going to click apply. You should know it's been successful because the mesh should turn, the wireframe of the mesh should turn pink, and that shows that it has actually worked. And what I always tend to do is just quickly go in. I'm just going to click my filter off for my geometry again. Go in and I'm just going to see how these are working. And it won't be perfect. First of all, you see there's some problems in there, but what I'm looking at is that it hasn't missed any parts of the mesh off. We haven't got any trailing verts. Okay. And then this N1 here, it's going to be this rotation here. Okay. So we just need to do some tweaking in terms of the skinning now. So again, this is an organic. This isn't an organic object. This is a mechanical thing. If we were doing a character, then one of the tools we can use, which is fantastic, is this paint skin weights. So if I go into this, and I'm not going to show this fully, but just to kind of show you where it is. What we can do here is just make sure I click on the mesh. In fact, just make sure I click on this again. Click on the mesh. Let's go back into that. Skin, paint skin weights. So here we can go through all the joint chains and actually see which verts are being affected by this. And this is done with this color there's visual color on there. So anything white, anything pure white, is being affected 100%. So any area that's white around verts, these verts down here, for example, are being controlled 100% by this joint. As this goes out bit by bit, that weight is being lessened. So as it goes into grey, the effect over these verts is less so. And then as we get to black, any area that's black is not being influenced by that particular joint that we have selected at all. So you can see on this one, we've got the same kind of thing. The bit in the middle is being controlled 100% by that bone. Towards the edges of this is fading out and is being controlled less by these. Okay, so it just works on the colour of this. And we can actually go in and start painting those things in. But as I say, for this as a mechanical object, there's a bit of a quicker way to do this. So I'm just going to close this down. And instead what I'm going to use is, if I go to Windows, General Editors, I'm going to use this component editor here. This is a really easy way of doing this kind of work, because it actually allows us to type in the values in here. So just making sure I'm on smooth skins. Another thing you may need to do is just go into the option and just unhide 0 columns. You'll see if I have that ticked on, we get nothing on there. So let's unhide that. You can sort alphabetically as well, which is why I've kind of named these the same name and then just with a naming structure on that. So they're all in the order of the joint chain that I want. You don't need to do that. Okay, so if we click those off, you see we have the N1 here. Let's just click this back on for now. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to use the fact that these are all separate elements. So I'm going to go through in vertex mode. Let's just double click on this. And we have different values in here. And actually, this is a value from 0 to 1. So each one of these are the individual vertex down here. These are the joints that these could be connected to. So say, for example, let's just select, let's do one that I know is on several ones. So this one here is actually being affected by 0.5 by joint mech arm 001 and 0.5 by mech arm 002. So both of these two bones here have an influence over these vertex points. Okay. Now in our example, what we want to have, and this one, is we want this to be fully affected 100% by this bone here and not by this bone here at all. So we have complete control over it. So we can do that by typing values in here. So I said 0 is no influence, 1 is 100% influence. So if I just double click on this, let's start out. So these I want to be fully affected by this first bone, my root bone here. So what I can do is I can just click on the top one and keep my left button pressed down and just drag down all the way down on here to the bottom. And I can just put in a value of 1 on there. Check I've got all of them, so just these down at the bottom here. You should have those as well. So now those are 100% affected by that one joint. Okay. Let's do the same with this. So I'm going to these two side sections are actually part of this, just as a separate element. So I'm going to do the same. Click on here, drag all the way down. Again, just checking that I've got them all. Put in a value of 1. And let's do the same with this here. Click on the top one, left, click and drag down. Set in a value of 1 and just check this bottom one here. Set that on there. Okay. So this one, the cylinder here, this is going to be the start of me wanting to be this to be affected by this second joint here. So with these, this time I'm going to go into my joint mech arm 2. I'm going to select these. I'm going to set this one to 1. It automatically sets all the others to 0 because it can only have an influence of up to 1. So you see on my totals, this should always be 1 on there. So that's working on it. It kind of zeroes out everything else. If it's to go in and put a value of 0.5 on one of these, it will try to put another value of 0.5 on something else as well. So you see this has done it on the first joint. But obviously in this instance, I just want this to be 1. So the nice thing about this is you have complete influence over which vertices are being controlled by which bones and by what specific amount. So let's carry on. This one here, I want this whole thing to be affected by this joint. So again, in my mech arm, let's drag this down. So let's do 1. Just check that I've got them all. Okay, next one. To this. I haven't deleted these edges here. I'll talk about those in a second when I've finished. So let's just carry on. So again, these are this time going to be by this joint 3. And this is where naming can really help you out. Again, just have a quick check. These ones here, this time by joint, make sure I've got this right. So this is joint 1, 2, 3. This is joint 4. Again, a value of 1. And then this final bit here, let's just double click. So this is going to be my joint 5. And again, a value of 1 on there. I'm not putting anything on the end one. You don't need that on there, but it can be quite useful to have that. So again, let's just go a quick check on this. Let's just switch this off. Let's go in. So we've got our rotation here. We've got our rotation here. Got our rotation on this one. One here. And this one is my X rotation for that there. Okay. So with this one, say I don't really want this edge on here. It's unnecessary. I only did it to give me this point here to be able to snap to. In some software, I remember this may not be the case in 3D Studio Max anymore, but I remember that when you used to skinning that, if you actually deleted anything afterwards, it did cause problems. With Maya, it's a bit more flexible, so hopefully this won't break. So I'm going to grab this edge, double clicking on it, do a control backspace. Double click on this one, do a control backspace. So I've deleted those edges. But let's check this. Okay, so you see it's not broken yet. It actually works quite well with this Maya. I would be careful you're not adding too many different points to it. You may have to reskin. Or you can repaint weights, but you know, you should really get your mesh as you need it to be before you start doing too much in terms of skinning. Just be aware of that. So I'm going to leave this here, and I'll do some more tutorials that actually look at setting up this a bit more as a animator friendly rig. But here we've got our base rig for this.